Hi, everyone. I'm here with Nick Krauspe today. He's the Director of Compliance and Ops for InDebted, obviously in the digital collection space. Nick, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much for having me.
So obviously you guys have done a lot of work in sort of digital collections. What are you seeing in terms of like trends that have been lifting out over the last couple of years? Have we reached a peak, or is it still as relevant as it ever been?
I think it's still as relevant as it's ever been. It's what we're seeing over different market spaces and different countries that we operate in is the uptake of it.
Mm,
So what we found from the offering that we have, so we have a digital first offering that we brought to the market a few years ago. And we're seeing something like 86%
mm,
of our clientele is taking us up on the sort of self-service digital approach to collection. So you could say
mm,
out of every 24 customers that engage with us, only one of them wants to pick up the phone and follow through on the more traditional ways of doing things, which
mm,
is an interesting uptake. And I think as the market for credit, utilities, whatever sort of market there is becoming more digital, the response back to that needs to be a more digital approach for customers. It's what customers, how they want to service their accounts. So
mm.
I think it's still very relevant. I don't think we've hit the peak yet. I think it can only get bigger and better. And that's across every market that we're in.
And what are you seeing from a company point of view? You hear it from the almost like the consumer point of view is they're very keen in terms of digital adoption. Are you seeing that kind of any kind of hesitation from a company point of view, or what are you seeing in terms of adoption there, in terms of pushing forward like pure digital channels or digital first channels, those kind of things?
There's definitely a keenness to proceed. There
Mm,
is still there is still some hesitation
mm,
towards an approach. And I suppose there you need to break it down into just the terminology. So
mm,
you have digital only or digital first. And I think those are two very different things.
mm,
So with the digital only, I believe there's a lot more hesitation there because just with that, you don't have as much of an option available for the consumer. So as a business, businesses are very concerned around the outcomes for customers and making sure that customers have everything available to them. And being digital first, there's less concern. I suppose it is a change, even that though it is a change from the norm. It's a change from the norm of send a letter, make a phone call, make a phone call. So what we've had is customers that have been or clients that have been a little bit hesitant once they have onboarded and we've gone through things and they've seen the results and they've seen the
mm,
contactability, the way that we've been able to engage with the customers, that's where that goes away. So I think once people actually get into it and they start seeing the results and they start seeing the outcome, they start seeing the way that the whole process works, we found that clients then become very excited by it. Obviously, lots of clients now are adopting their own digital first approaches and their own digital approaches to dealing with customers because it is what the market's calling for. So yeah, give it 4 years ago, I think a lot more hesitation, but as we're starting to evolve and move, it's being taken up a bit more.
The words around, I suppose, digital, and there's, as you say, there's a lot of sort of misconception around digital basically being self-service or 100% digital or those kind of things. How much do you think that sort of generates confusion? So when you're out with sort of clients or are out in the market, how much are you having to explain this in terms of digital only versus digital first? And because it feels like we're evolving to this sort of much more sort of blended world, which you can do a little bit of anything really around what the customer wants to do, which seems to be digital largely, but not
Mhm.
exclusively as well.
I think it is explaining that to clients. And I suppose when you have the initial meetings with clients, especially from when we're having the conversations, is
Mm.
just explaining to them that it isn't a case of that a customer has no means outside of digital means. So the customer has exactly the same ability to pick up the phone and have a conversation with us, request something in writing. It's just on what the customer's want is rather than just saying this is the only channel that we're going to have available to you. And I think that's where the confusion comes in. I do understand the hesitation of digital only because you may have customers that can't adapt to that. But yeah, we do have to have conversations. We have demos that we go through with clients. So we show them like, here's the customer journey. This is the jump off point. And this is where the customer can go, actually, I want to speak to someone. So I'm going to jump down this journey. I'm going to jump down this journey. And I think
Yeah.
that changes perception to everything.
And you guys are obviously you're in the UK, but you're also big in the US and obviously grew up in
Mhm.
in Australia. So you're in lots of different
Right.
markets all the way around the world. How do you find that sort of like digital first adoption changing by market? Are there different flavors in different markets in terms of evolution where we are, but also how easily it's adopted as well?
So I'd probably say across different markets, the UK and Australia are probably the most two similar. Now
Mm,
that's not just across client base, but also across regulation, the adoption of a digital first approach and being able to do that compliantly within that environment and making sure that the right outcomes for customers are there. The US, obviously, there's lots of different laws that the US adopts that we then have made into its own system. So it's all about in each marketplace, there's its own challenges to digital adoption. There's its own challenges to different approaches, and it's different to SMSing or texting in the US as there is to the UK, as there is to New Zealand, as an example. So it's just us working through each market, treating each market as its own entity and its own place, building the systems and processes around that. The digital adoption, I think, digital first adoption is being taken on well in all the countries that we're dealing in, because it's just as clients are. Few more questions potentially coming out of the US than they have in other markets, but it's working. And I'd say the US has now become the biggest growth market we have.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of like the evolution of it, at least anyway, which is the interplay between regulation and digital adoption is one of the things I noticed. Obviously, Australia is a heavily regulated market. The UK is a heavily regulated market. Increasingly, the US is getting heavily regulated as well. But how much do you think the regulation almost like forces almost like cost and extra process onto a lot of the creditors that then they then initially look at digital around, look, this is a cost play that we can actually use to do that. But then they actually work out, well, actually, there's other things we can do with it as well. How much do you think what's the role of regulation in terms of driving digital adoption versus coming from the consumer side, of like the consumers want us to do it, those kind of things?
Most regulations now are consumer based outcome. It is around adopting. So if we look in the UK in itself with the consumer duty, it's finding and having a omni-channel approach to dealing with customers and giving customers what they want to ensure that the best outcomes for their customers and the best way of contacting that customer, engaging with that customer, working with that customer to receive an outcome. And our clients are seeing that and they understand that, and they want to make sure that we can provide that outcome for the customer. Now, in markets such as Australia, as an example, the treatment of customers and the digital approach works really well with that. I suppose it's a less obtrusive way of engaging with customers and allowing customers an extra bit of breathing space for them to be able to engage and to contact us. Regulations obviously also stipulate around how many times that you can contact customers, how many times you engage with customers. And are we taking the digital first approach leaves less margin for error with doing that because of the controls you can have in place to ensure the communications are going out in a certain time, at a certain time, and controlling that where it may be a different approach and more traditional methods. Everyone has controls, obviously, and everyone's doing a fantastic job. It's just you have that extra layer of control with a digital first approach.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like, how do you make the persuasive argument around moving digital first? So a little bit of my experience was you've been to some markets, and we used to very much sort of use outbound telephony to try and get hold of people, and it's almost so embedded in our processes. To move away from that seems, why would I do that? Because it's working so well. I just need to do more of the same, almost automate more of the same, versus almost like changing it to then use outbound sort of digital kind of approaches. And so I'm worried I'm going to leave money on the table, I think is really where they are. Yeah, there's almost like a bit of a leap of faith there. So therefore you need to try it. What do you think's driving that? What's your argument to say, look, you've got to try this stuff because it works?
I think the biggest argument is that we put forward is what we can show off the back of the work that we've done. As I think I mentioned to you before, to show that with going to a client and saying, with people or clients in a very similar position as you, if you look at the uptake of this, we're looking at 86% of the portfolios uptaking the digital first approach. And then just being able to demonstrate that for those customers that you have that don't want to adopt that, we're just as suited to deal with them as well. What we find is clients now looking at things and going through their processes and going actually and identifying customers that they believe that might be the best for a digital first approach. So them taking that, building their own processes in place and going, actually, what we're finding is customers of this portfolio deal better in the digital first approach. Now, at InDebted, we also deal very closely with clients and we feedback information as well. We go, look, we're finding this portfolio engages better down this channel. This portfolio engages better in this channel. And we build that partnership in those conversations, which is why I think a lot of our clients that we deal with are very happy with what we have. And we build partnerships rather than just a normal sort of client vendor relationship.
Yeah. I suppose what you're saying is, I suppose it can be a bit of a scary step, but the data says it's possible, but it's a bit of a scary step initially. But actually, if you look at it, it's worth doing to a certain extent, because people do seem to hesitate. And in terms of like digital strategies, in terms of getting hold of people, those kind of things, what's your view in terms of like, I suppose, principles around what works and what doesn't, do you think, in your kind of experience?
With the platform that we use and the way that we do things, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to develop is a personal customer journey per customer that we engage with.
Mm,
So with the machine learning models that we use, it's almost to create a specific journey. So the journey that Chris would have is going to be very different to the journey that Nick has at
mm,
times that we're trying to contact people, methods that we're trying to contact you down. So it really builds around the engagement that an individual has with the platform for it to decide what we're going to be doing next.
mm. And part of the role of that, I suppose, is data, right? In terms of gathering
Mhm.
data, those kind of things. So how embedded is that in the journey?
That's again the biggest part about it. So the system that we use, it utilizes that machine learning and it builds the customer journey around that.
Mm,
So a data-driven approach is extremely important. We have millions and millions of data points to go. We believe that this person's going to interact in a certain way, and then building around that to go, okay, we believe that he's going to interact like that. Oh, something's gone, hasn't gone to plan, so let's filter back. Let's do it there again. So it it's I think at the moment we have over 1 billion insights
mhm.
earlier this year that we got over. So it's insights into behaviors and into the machine learning model builds onto that. And as we continue to grow within the different markets, it's going to build up and it's going to build even better. Yeah, data is obviously absolute key to around this. The more data that we can obtain, um, relevant data, obviously.
Mm.
There's no need for over the top data on things. It's just the data that we need to be able to build that modeling.
How do you think it's going to affect our processing? You talked a bit about machine learning and I suppose AI or so, but let's talk about machine learning as well. Which was how much do you think that's going to affect our process design? Because very much a lot of the digital kind of processes we've designed so far have been sort of like, well, let's take our existing process and let's use digital channels as an example. Let's use digital strategies, those kind of things. Do you think we're going to get to the point where we're going to completely rethink around almost like the questions we're asking or the prompts we're asking that will then be indicatives? How much do we need to start thinking about that as much as just here's a digital approach on our existing approach, I suppose, to a certain extent?
I think you have to look at blending in the more traditional questions that you should be asking and
Mm,
new ones to start building it out. So there's required questioning that we need to make sure that we're doing, especially in the markets that we work in. And you should definitely build your processes around those. So addressing affordability, addressing customer circumstances and addressing potential customer vulnerability. So you need to build that deeply into your processes. What the machine learning does, it helps you pick up on those traits in maybe a different way
mm,
outside of what the traditional way would have been, where you were required for a customer to answer a question before you could start making those investigations. Whereas now, just by the way someone's engaging with the system might actually flag, or okay, maybe there's something along here the customer doesn't understand. Let's reach out,
mm.
let's have a conversation with the customer there. So I think all processes need to evolve. And that's with us as well. Our processes evolve all the time when we start building new things. So there has to be the element of the traditional and the required, but then it's building those into a way that it's more available to clients and to customers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was thinking almost like it's like when we're having a conversation, is do we deliberately ask questions like you would if you were talking with someone? But you can also steer the conversation to certain directions as well, which then becomes interesting in terms of looking at AI or machine learning kind of things. So, like
Mhm.
we might say, like, how are things today, as an example, or might give you an indication around vulnerability. But it's almost like those
Mhm.
kind of questions. And I just wonder if we're going to be able to put some of those into our processes as well, because we're capturing data all the time and you can do that digitally as well. So, do you ask other things that might be associated that could be predictive? How you use it's interesting in terms of like you mentioned the number, it was a huge number. I think you just mentioned in terms of like data points. How do you
Mhm.
physically make sure you're concentrating on the right bits of data as well? Because you can get swamped by it as well. There's almost so much data, you get swamped by it. And it's really around what's predictive versus not. How do you handle that to make sure you just don't get almost like an avalanche of data comes over you and then you can't really see what's going on?
So there are people that work in the data modeling and the machine learning that are way more intelligent than me.
Yeah.
We have a very strong data analytics team and engineering department. So yeah, absolutely. you can become overwhelmed with all the different data points. You can become overwhelmed. What we try and do is we try and do testing to make sure that whatever we're gathering is relevant to what we want to achieve.
Mm,
And that again, it's a lot of trial and error, working with the team, going into the data, we're seeing these trends, those trends. And again, we spoke about MI and reporting off the back of it is so important to be able to go, we've used this sort of data. These are the results. This is what we've seen from a contactability, from a treatment, and from a return point of view. And actually know that data then potentially isn't relevant for this portfolio. But there's a lot of people working in the background just to make sure that, yeah, we are using the relevant data for the relevant.
yeah, I mean, and sort of using data, I suppose, to identify things like vulnerability. That's been a hot topic in the UK for a while now, linked with financial vulnerability as well. But how do you find in terms of identifying some of that stuff digitally? Obviously, they can always go through to talk with an agent. You can still do that because it's digital first. But I suppose trying to do that in a digital kind of manner, trying to flag it. What do you think is like best practice around that in terms of trying to identify people? What's your approach?
It's again, it goes down to the way that customers engage.
Mm,
And when I say engagement, I don't just mean around customers actually replying to messages.
mm,
It's about customers getting stuck at a certain point. So a customer going through a digital affordability assessment and
mm,
dropping out of the affordability assessment and going, okay, and the customer going, actually, I don't want to answer these questions. I
mm,
was going, okay, let's try and understand why the customer doesn't want to answer these questions. Or customers who are reading messages but not responding. Is there something we can do better? Is
mm,
that a potential flag of vulnerability? Is that a potential flag of not understanding? What can we do to make that better? So
mm,
I suppose where the digital first approach gives you a bit more insight into that, which is always open to interpretation, always absolutely open to interpretation, is the fact that we can see other sort of engagements from customers. Whereas if you were working on a system where it was just, let's call out, you're reliant on that engagement from a customer to understand, oh, okay, this person is just blocking my phone calls, etc. Or actually being able to see this message has been read and this message has been read, and we're trying to understand why is the customer not engaging with us. So it opens up different contact points, taking a digital first approach, which should then allow you more opportunity
mm.
to look at customer potential vulnerability or customer understanding. So it opens further doors, I believe.
Yeah. So and I think what you're saying is rather than just looking at the actual data around the contact rate or those kind of things, is actually almost look at the almost like the metadata that sits around it, which is then
Mhm.
what happens around that, and what does that mean
Yeah,
from almost like from an interpretation point of view. It's like to pull that together and like having a much more sophisticated understanding of that contact landscape to a certain extent.
correct.
Yeah. Okay. And contact channels are always a big discussion point in terms of what's best, what's hot. So we've had SMS, obviously we've got calls, we talked about that. There's other sort of like social media kind of channels, and you've got apps and those kind of things. What do you find is bubbling, and what do you think is working best? I mean, WhatsApp is always talked about. I'm not sure what your views are on that in terms of like its use versus not versus SMS as an example. But what are you seeing as being popular from a consumer point of view, and then also from a almost like from a business point of view as well.
Different channels. It's funny because I couldn't pinpoint one because different markets and different clients are engaged in a different way. We see a lot on like I said, I think 86% of customers followed through with a self-service point.
Mm,
So where they click through to the portal and they can service their debt, they can raise a query, they can engage that way. That's our biggest uptake of things. Email is always going to be a big one.
mm,
But again, what we also up is live chat. So customers engaging, just being able
mm,
to go through. So once they've engaged, once they've gone into their portal, they can then go, oh, I want to speak to someone. They can go into a live chat, jump off that way. But a lot of customers as well, they like using the self-service portal. So they can go, this is what I want to do, or this is the information I need, which pops it through. And then it gives them the option of how do you want us to respond to you? The
mm.
customer can go, oh, can you give me a call? Or can you send me an email? Or can you send me a text message?
And what do you think the future is of live chat, particularly agents, but also live chat on text as well, like, versus self-serve portal? It's quite interesting in terms of when people want to engage and have a more discursive kind of discussion kind of option versus just being clicking following through from a portal point of view. What do you think is the balance there, and why do you think people flip over to then having that more in-depth kind of chat? Is it or what point is it versus just doing self-serve?
So look, I think there's always going to be a proportion of people
Mm,
that want to speak to something to another person. It's just
mm,
it's in our nature, and it's the way that we do things. I couldn't give you a specific number of that, but I think the role of the agent and being able to engage with another person that's never going to go away. There's always going
mm,
to be the need for that. That's why I don't believe that will ever move to a completely digital only point of view. I think there's sometimes customers may feel that they do. They just need to they need to be able to speak to someone. And that's why we have our customer experience team. So our contact center team to be able to have and address those questions. I think
mm,
sometimes people feel that expressing themselves in a more face to face, but over the phone or just chatting to an individual. So all of our live chats, etc., are all done person. It's a person that comes out to the end. And I think sometimes depending on your query, your dispute or your complaints, people just want to speak to another person. And it also goes down to people's ability to articulate what they want to say. Sometimes it's easier to articulate over the phone and say, this is how I'm feeling about this than it is to do via a digital channel.
mm. Yeah, I think to a certain extent it feels time to answer is one thing, which is it can be actually quicker to go through a portal than it is even doing text chat to a certain extent if you really know
Yeah.
what you're doing. But on the other hand, then there's also the other element, which is almost like that empathy, talking with someone who understands what it is and can help guide you,
Mhm.
right? And those are almost like two ideas wrapped up in the same kind of discussion that we have. And I suppose it's maybe it's the bit of the balance of those in terms of which kind of direction you go to. I don't know what you think.
Like again, like I said, I think there's always going to be the need for an agent. And I think that there are certain circumstances that people may be experiencing or go through where they just want to speak to another
Mm,
person and they want that sort of assurance and they want that empathy from another human being. And I think that's a really important, especially in the market that we deal in, and that level of empathy needs to be there. And sometimes people need that, and that's the need. So it's again where I talk about omni-channel and giving people that opportunity and that outcome to be able to do that.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose AI has been a hot topic, and I suppose particularly I'm going to talk about large language models. How far do you think they can push into the probably that more interactive kind of conversation versus talking with an agent? And I suppose there's maybe just comment around what you're seeing in different markets as well, because I think again, even on that, there seems like there's different adoption and different levels of readiness to a certain extent. But how far do you think they can push? I mean, what kind of things are you looking at from that at the moment, at least, anyway?
So from an AI point of view, we obviously, we utilize AI to help direct people into the right place. So from a language modeling point of view, if somebody says, oh, I want to do this, we can then, that will then be picked up by the AI modeling and go, oh, okay, we have an answer for you here. Is this answer good enough? Or do you want to speak to someone? So just giving people that capability to do that. I think AI is only going to grow more and more. I
Mm,
think you're seeing that across everything. I know my bank is now adopting more sort of AI modeling around
mm,
things, and it's all part of the digital revolution. AI has a massive place to play in this. I think as we move into a more sort of people where people expect and want responses, and like you said about the wait time, that sometimes if you're waiting to speak to a person, there may be a couple of hours that you need to wait before you speak to someone or whatever the situation may be, or respond back to an email. Whereas AI is becoming more and more intelligent that you can just go, this is what it is, and there's instant response
mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
to it. So I don't, again, I don't think it'll ever replace the human interaction side of things, but it's getting smarter and smarter as the days go on.
And are you finding that clients are still talking about it as much as they were? Because it definitely reached, for me, it reached a little bit of a peak at the end of the end of last year, right? And we were all talking about it. We all got super excited about it because it was in the public consciousness. It feels like it's died down a little bit this year, at least from a media frenzy point of view, anyway. What are you seeing like on the ground in terms of what clients are asking for? Are they still saying, and what are you doing about AI? Or they're saying, how does it just improve my process?
It's more, what are you doing with AI and what can it do to improve my process? So no, I think it's
Mm,
still very prevalent in the eyes of our clients and our stakeholders. But I do agree with you. It was all over the news. Is AI going to take all our jobs away? Is this, I think it was just because it blew up so quickly and it just seems to come to the forefront so quickly.
mm,
It did create that frenzy. I think people are still looking at it. I think people are less hesitant about using it and that they have been previously.
mm.
And I think there's more of an understanding of what it can do, the capabilities behind it, what good it can do.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Yeah, there was that peak at the end of last year, and now it's become, I think, so normative in society. Anybody can have a chat GPT. They can and play, and you can play along with that just from home.
Yeah.
So it's just the understanding of what it does. You can't even, I don't know about you, but if I Google something on my phone now, the first response is AI resolver, and it gives me a
Yeah.
response before I even look at any articles. And that's again the adoption of it being taken into different businesses. Is if I can go on and I can type in a question into a website, and then the AI just goes, "Oh, okay, I'll click that keyword. Here we go. Here's your responses."
Mm.
It makes it much easier rather than having to go and click through each FAQ. It can direct you to the specific one that you want.
There's a bit of a fear of the new, isn't there, when it first comes out, and everyone's like immediately, I'm worried about it, and that's the initial piece, and then it's like you're worried about it, but also excited about it, and you get those two parts of the argument, and then it like calms down a little bit, and you get into sort of the execution of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I agree, and I think it's one of those things that there will be there's always going to be fears because it is something new, and I think with the way society is at the moment, everything's moving so quickly, and there's so many
Mm.
different changes, and there's so many, and it's not just the adoption of businesses; it's the adoption around regulation, and what
Mm.
does the use of AI mean to regulation around the processing of data. Where does this sort of fall in under the UK GDPR, GDPR for the greater, or all the requirements that we have all over the world around data storage and usage of
Mm.
data. So it's evolving really quickly. And at the same time, regulation needs to evolve with that. And with regulatory evolution, that comes with process evolution. So it's just a big boiling pot of
Yeah,
excitement.
well, I'm old enough to remember when digital servicing first came online, and we were having debates around whether we needed to turn off statements or not, and sort of those kind of things. So you can see how far we've evolved, and even then there was hesitation. Now, and if you, as you say, right to the very top, you talk about the stats around just a huge percentage of people just go to digital first now. Anyway, it's like embedded in a lot of our processes. So we've come a long way. It's some of these things just take time, I think, to a certain extent.
No, absolutely. And it'll just, as the markets change and as the requirements change for individuals, there's going to be, I believe, more and more call for it. You see it in the banking world at the moment, where even if you walk to a bank branch, there's maybe one person at the till and
Mm.
everything else is go and serve at the machine. But there's always that
Mm.
person hanging around at the machines in case you don't know what you're doing to be able to jump in. And that, I suppose, is a visual representation of the digital first approach.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, very good. So we're on this like quite accelerated trajectory, really. If you put your crystal ball out, take your crystal ball out, or you put your prediction hat on, where do you think we're going to be in the next sort of 5 years? What are some of the big things, the big ideas we got to be watching out for? Some of the things that you guys are thinking about in terms of like where you think we'll go.
From a business point of view, we're looking to expand out. And offer this into different markets across the world. We've just closed a Series C, which is absolutely fantastic, which is opening up our doors. So we're looking to launch in Mexico and the UAE and to start
Mm.
delivering this into different marketplaces.
Mm.
Where do I see us in 5 years' time? I think in 5 years' time, I think there's going to be a lot of regulatory change. There's going to be a lot of requirements to have a more digital approach across every sort of market that we have, and more requirements from customers. I think that's going to not just be in the key markets that we're in at the moment, but I think that's going to be adopted across everywhere. And with that, there's going to be more legal requirements, more regulatory requirements, more controls that are going to need to be put in place just to make sure that this is the right outcome for people. But it's only on a trajectory to go up at the moment. And again, I think you're seeing the more traditional institutions are adopting the digital approach, and then they're just going to, as soon as they really get stuck in, that's when the entire trend just gets set. I can't see any step backs in the next 5 years, but only lots and lots of steps forward.
Yeah. So it sounds like your view is there's a huge amount of opportunity out there, and it's like it's just going to keep on snowballing to a certain extent. Yeah, Nick, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating to chat with you and find out really from the coalface around what's happening with digital first. It's been a trend for a long time, as you kind of said, but it does feel like it's been accelerating. And as you say, even some of those who were maybe more hesitant seem to now be starting to adopt it, and but the opportunity is huge, isn't it? So
It is, and it's huge from an all over point of view. It's huge for clients and their productivity, but it's also huge for customers. And I think that's where the digital first approach really does give us that sort of, you know, it's clearing away boundaries for customers to be able to engage in a way that they're most comfortable to, which is a great outcome for clients and customers. And it's exactly what we want to do. We want to mediate that experience.
Well, fantastic. Nick, I say, thanks very much for making time. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.